Welcome to episode 156 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. Today I'm interviewing screenwriter and director Paul Tanter. He just did an action film called Kill Ratio. We walk through his early days as a screenwriter, how he got his first gig as a screenwriter, and then how he was able to turn that screenwriting career into a career as a writer-director. So stay tuned for that. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread word about the podcast, so they're very much appreciated. Any websites or links that I mention in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcast, and then just look for episode number 156. If you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide. I'll teach you how to write a professional logline and query letter and how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. Really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. So a quick few words about what I'm working on. Once again, the main thing I'm working on is post-production on my crime action thriller film, The Pinch. So as I've mentioned over the last few weeks on the podcast, I've got my second rough cut of the film done. I've now watched it a bunch of times and made a list of more revisions. And I've gotten a bunch of notes from other people who are involved in the film, the cinematographer, another producer friend, one of the other producers on the film. I've just really tried to send the film out, this rough cut out, to some of the people. An executive producer who I found through Kickstarter, he gave me a few notes. So just a lot of notes I'm just trying to collect, and then I'm going to look at the notes and really just try and get some consensus. It's not unlike getting notes on your screenplay. You want to pass it out, get a consensus from a bunch of different people who you trust and you respect their opinion. You get those notes back, and then you start to look at what are some of the issues that a lot of the people are having, and then go back in and try and address those issues. So again, this is a pretty solid cut of the film, but once we go back in there with the editor, I'm just going to sit with him. We're going to start to implement these notes. I also recorded some additional voiceover to lay in on this next cut, and it's just scratch voiceover. And when I say, a recorded voiceover, it's basically I wrote the voiceover, and then I actually recorded it with my voice. If it feels like it's working in this next cut, then I'll have to bring the actor back in and actually do some voiceover that way. Get the actor obviously to do the voiceover, but just for this next cut, it's just basically me doing the voiceover, just to get a feel of the pacing and the timing, see if this voiceover is going to work. There's a couple areas in the story where I think having some voiceover will kind of keep the story going and explain a few things that maybe I didn't shoot as well as I could have, and so this voiceover hopefully can kind of compensate for some of that. It's not really ideal, but at this point, we have basically what we have in terms of the footage, and so now it's just a matter of trying to make the best film with the footage we have. I also, this past weekend, I shot a clock. Me and producer Adam Strange, we went back to the set where we had a clock, and the clock is featured in the film, and we had access to that clock. So basically we went back there and just shot a close-up of the clock, basically just ticking. There is a time cut, sort of a passage of time that we need to put into the film. And so this was just kind of a quick, easy way to do that. I think it'll be, again, interesting. It'll be very clear. I don't know if interesting is the right word. It'll be very clear and concise, just showing this clock passing. And these are going to be like, it's going to be like a second of actual footage in the film, but I think it will kind of break up. There's one scene where they're sitting there for a long time, basically waiting for the guy to come home, and I want to just really show the passage of time. There's some dialogue that goes on, and I think having this passage of time, it'll make more sense if the audience really understand that there's a lot of time going on, not just sort of assuming that they get that. So this is the first episode of 2017. Hopefully everyone has had a good holiday and New Year's. However, I'm recording this episode on December 19th, which is right before the holiday. So my plan is to work with the editor probably 2 days this week, and then probably 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 days next week, which is after Christmas. I'm leaving for the Christmas holiday with my wife and my kids this Thursday. So I've got a couple days this week. I'm going to try and get in with the editor. And then after Christmas is Sunday. So then next week, as I said, 2, 3, maybe 4 days next week, I'll be implementing these notes. Hopefully I can get them implemented in 4 or 5, maybe 6 days, and then have the next cut of the film. This next cut of the film should be very close to locked picture. At least I'm hoping. At this point, as I said, we've gone through the film, this last cut of the film. We went through, we really, made our choices, like which cut is the best cut, which take is the best take, which, angle is the best angle. And so we've kind of done that. So now it's really just a matter of really finessing the film. I mean, the basic film, I'd say, is pretty much there, for better, for worse. And now it's just a matter of trying to make it as good as possible. And we're just, as I said, recording this voiceover, just getting this insert of the clock, and we'll put those pieces together. There's a few things where you got to crop here and, do a little work on some of the cropping of the shots. And, maybe there's a couple cuts here that aren't quite flowing right. But again, it's just really sort of finessing. And as I said, hopefully this next cut will be pretty close to lock picture, but who knows, there might be some things that maybe this voiceover is not going to work at all. And we'll watch and say, this is not working. We got to think of something else. So we might have to go back in and do another cut after that. We'll just have to see. But anyways, that's the plan. And that's what I'm working on. So now let's go ahead and get into the main segment. Today, I'm interviewing writer, director Paul Tanter. Here is the interview. Welcome, Paul, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Hey, thank you very much for having me on.
So to start out, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up, and how did you get interested in the entertainment business?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I grew up in London, England, and I got into film through writing. Actually, I'd always wanted to get into writing. And when I was at university, I would sort of like hang out with the drama crowd and write things for plays, and I directed a play and stuff. And when I left university, I was very fortunate to be contacted by a friend who was an actor who was attached to a film. They were looking for a writer to rewrite the script they had, and so she put me in contact with the producer, and I sort of. I said yes to it, and then she put me in contact. And it was like a no-paying job, but I thought, I shall give this a go and see if it's something that I can do. And I did it, and fortunately, it was something that I sort of was able to do. And I started working with that producer on a few films, and that was my first job. So my first film job was actually a rewriting job. Mm-hmm. And I was sort of like, learning the ropes as I went, and kind of, learning the rules of what you do and don't do when you're writing, kind of as I went, and feeling my way, kind of thing. And so I wrote a couple of films, and then and I was always very interested in the filmmaking process. So even on the films that I wrote, I would go down on set and kind of work on, help out on the film on. And by the time we got a few films in, I was kind of how can I put this? I'd seen like other directors kind of like take the work and maybe not do exactly what I thought we should be doing with it. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, I sort of bugged the producer and said, "Hey, maybe I could, direct the next one." I was able to sort of edge my way in that way. So at that point, I then made the step from writing to writing and directing. But yes, I originally got into it just basically through, it was kind of through knowing someone who needed someone at the right time. So it was kind of a bit of luck in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Now, had you written some spec scripts before you got this first writing assignment? Did you show the producer some stuff?
No, I hadn't. No, I was working in very local radio at the time, doing sort of news pieces. Whilst I had the ability to write, and I sort of good experience, all of my experience of writing was basically news, non-fiction, and a lot of stuff from when I was at university, from the degrees I did. And so I had, I could write, but there was never a great deal of experience of of scripts or spec scripts or anything like that. So I'd never gone down the road of I'm gonna write. I'm gonna I've got a story that I'm gonna write and I'm gonna send it out to producers and that kind of thing. No, I've never kind of gone. I've never experienced that route or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk about your transition to director. I get a lot of writers coming to me saying, oh, I want to make sure my script is done properly. I want to be the director. And I always warn them that that can be an incredible turnoff to a producer. And I'm just curious, did you get some pushback when you started, saying, well, maybe I could direct one? Did they want you to go direct some shorts? Did you, have to do something to demonstrate that you actually knew how to direct, or just through your relationship, you were able to get that assignment?
Well, the compromise there, so there was a slight compromise in the by the time I was coming to the point where I was saying, oh, I want to direct the third one, we were in the third of a series of films where each time the budget kind of actually got a bit bigger each time. So by the third one, we were looking at the biggest amount of money and the most names in the movie and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And so the producer said to me, and probably quite sensibly, to be honest, look, I couldn't let you direct it solo. For one thing, the distributor probably wouldn't, appreciate that very much. But what I can do is I can pair you up with another director, and you guys can co-direct together. And that was kind of a good, happy compromise. So myself and someone else co-directed. Someone else who'd only directed one other feature anyway. We co-directed the film, and that was kind of, a good compromise into doing it, rather than having the writer who's totally inexperienced at directing. It was kind of it was a way to kind of get into it without having to totally
mm-hmm.
jump into the deep end, I suppose. But I think I can totally understand the desire of writers to direct their own stuff, because that's exactly what I had, and it was exactly the same thought process. I know how it should be done. If someone else takes it, they won't do it the right way. But which is, not an unreasonable thought process. But also at the same time, I was young and inexperienced, and as you get a bit older and more experienced, you realise that a lot of there will always be compromises to be made. So you might, if a producer takes on the project and lets you direct it, and you might think, well, why shouldn't they? It's my script. But actually, if they're the one finding the funds for it, then they have the right to say who directs it. And if they do take you on to direct it, there's still always limitations in terms of budget, time, a million other things. So you could be taken on to direct your own feature, but then you've got to look at it from the perspective of the producer will be going, well, we need to kind of scale some things back here, or maybe this thing can't be done. And there will be compromises to be made in that regard. Mm-hmm. And in that instance, sometimes the writer will go, okay, no problem. Okay, we can change this, and we can adapt, and they'll go on, and they'll probably, thrive directing. But sometimes there can be the tendency to kind of be a little bit stubborn and want to hold on and feel like the screenplay is precious and could never be changed. And in that instance, you may be shooting yourself in the foot, because it's that stubbornness can be the difference between actually, shooting the movie and not. And the difference can be that if you compromise, you might end up being able to shoot the movie, and if you don't, then it'll be another script that sits there forever and never gets made, or it gets given to someone else to direct. So that was kind of the lesson there, that you could. You're always very proud of the script that you write, and whenever I finish a script, I'm always very proud of it. Although when I do write, I kind of have in the back of my mind half an idea of, well, I know what we'll be able to afford and how long we'll have to shoot things, that kind of thing. So I tend to try and write towards that ideal anyway. And that was something I always tell people to have in their mind. Yes, it's great to have imagination, but if it's a low budget film, you can't, the warehouse can't always explode. You have to kind of try and compromise sometimes. So I think that can be the difference between the writer who ends up directing the movie and the one who doesn't.
Yeah. And so let's talk about sort of how your career was unfolding. So now you've written 3 scripts. You've now written and directed or co-directed one of your scripts. At some point, did you get an agent and a manager? Did you start to branch out to work with other producers? Maybe you can just talk about sort of how your career progressed from after those first 3 films.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Now, I will say that I can only speak from the experience that I've had, so I don't know whether my experience is typical or, or whether it's the exception rather than the rule. But I've never had an agent. I've never approached an agent. I've had an agent approach me. But all I've done is I've kind of, myself, I've always tended to work with the same sort of small group of producers. And we just end up making our own stuff, and the stuff we make, we always have a mind towards making things that are commercial. Mm-hmm. So we know what the audience will be for it, and we know that it will sell. And so we make this stuff, and that has kind of kept me busy for as long as I've been doing it. And in recent years, I've reached the point where other producers who I haven't worked for have kind of like, either they are, acquaintances of acquaintances, or maybe they've seen something I've done, and then they just get in contact directly. It's not difficult to, and I've been offered and I've taken other directing work from that. But really, most of the stuff I make is kind of with the same producer, and we make and after a few movies, I started producing as well. So I tended to kind of like just create my own stuff, and we make our own stuff. And then at that point, you're kind of too busy to do anything else for anyone else. But as I say, I've kind of been offered other directing work in recent years. So I suppose I've reached the point now where I can, where I'm not just creating my own work, but I'm getting offered it by other people as well.
Yeah, yeah. So we're going to dig into kill ratio. I just want to touch on one thing you just said and expand on it a little bit. You said that you guys are constantly trying to make new stuff that's commercial and that has a clear audience. Maybe you can talk about that just for a second, because I feel like especially newer screenwriters, they come into it oftentimes with their passion project, and I often see the log line or something, and I'm like, I don't think that could ever sell. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, sorry. It cut out for a second, but I think I know what the question was. Yeah. So yes, there is the struggling writer who has their magnum opus, who labors for years with it to get it made. And sometimes it will take several years before they make it. And if they do make it, and making a movie is an achievement in itself. But they might get it made, and then there are many movies that are made every year that just sit on the shelf and are never seen by anyone because no distributor wants them. And so the thing that we're always looking for when we're with our projects is who is going to buy it at the end, who's the audience. You have to look at it from the point of view of the distributor. If you're a filmmaker and you go to a distributor, what is it you want to be selling in 6 months or 9 months or a year from now? And then they can, and it's the distributor who are the customer of the filmmaker, really. In that sense, it's not the audience. The audience is the customer of the distributor, and so you need to know what the distributors want to be selling. And so if they tell you, then and it's not difficult because you just ask them and they tell you, and then at that point you then have an idea of, right, that I know what kind of movie I need to be making in order to make something that will sell, and so you can then tailor it around that. So in the UK, I've done a sort of fair amount of crime genre, of action, and of a lot of hooligan films, because there's a market there for them in the UK. And all of these things are always in home entertainment, so it's like it's DVD and it's online release like iTunes and video on demand services. These things aren't made really for theatrical release in a lot of instances because there's never any because distributors never want to do a theatrical release because there's no money there in them unless it's a massive movie. So I think in that regard, that's one piece of advice I do often give people, which is think about what is commercial, what will sell, and what distributors are looking for. And that's not to say that it's that you can't write something that is a piece of art and that is dear to you and that is and then there's something personal to you. But at the same time, don't be someone who spends 3 years getting a film off the ground, and then you make it, and then you spend a year trying to get it to a distributor and no one wants it, and then you put it around at a few festivals maybe, and then after 18 months you put it on Vimeo for nothing, because you don't have anything else to do with it. That to me is like, if you've gone through all that effort and all that cost especially, then you want to try and get it to a wider audience. You want to try and get it to the as widest audience as possible. And there's a reason why filmmakers generally don't self-release, and that's because they don't have the mechanisms in place to reach the audience. And the people with the mechanisms in place to reach the audience are distributors, because that's what they do. So yeah, that's always kind of our ethos, always have in the forefront of your mind who's the audience, who's going to be buying it, and what's commercial.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's just talk about that just for a second. I know this is kind of getting off the topic of screenwriting, but I think it's interesting to hear. I myself have been talking to distributors recently. I'm about done with a film, and I've started to kind of engage some distributors, and that's one of my big things, is just asking them, what are you selling? What are you looking for? And I'm finding it's not always a super crystal clear answer. A lot of distributors aren't always that clear what they're looking for. There is some mystery to it, and if it was not mysterious, then distributors would be producing movies themselves.
Yeah.
And so maybe you can talk about some of those conversations and how you kind of ferret through that landscape, because it's not always as simple as just asking a distributor and getting a clear answer. Go make movie X with actor Y. Sometimes it's a little more nuanced than that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, you're right. Okay, so sometimes they are a bit vague, or maybe they're not entirely sure about what they want. But then at the same time, so in some instances they will simply say, what we want is a hooligan movie or a siege movie or something like that, and that can be sort of general enough in itself. But even if they're not telling you what it is that they want, it doesn't take a lot of research to look at what they're generally selling. So you can look at a distributor's back catalogue, and usually at what they've got coming up. And you can look at those things and you can see the trends of what kind of genres they tend to go for one thing, if there's any particular kind of stories they're after. But at the same time, there's a certain amount of common sense things about making something commercial, which is, things like you generally need a couple of names in the, at least one name in the film. So a lot of first-time filmmakers will, if they manage to get it made, they don't, it's all unknowns. And I realize that there is a chicken and egg situation to this. I do, in that if you don't have, if you're just starting out, it's difficult to get a name in the first place to do something, and then sell it off the back of the name. But to be honest, that's kind of part of the challenges of actually doing it all. When we started off, in our first couple of films, obviously we didn't have massive stars, but we would get kind of people who had done daytime soaps and that kind of thing, and the occasional sports star as a bit of a novelty or something like that. And these are all things that kind of whilst it means that it's not going to be a worldwide hit, it gets a bit of traction, at least in the country that you're based in. Mm-hmm. And then from that you build upon that for the next one, and so that hopefully the next one has a slightly bigger name, and you just keep on going like that. So that's one thing, that's something that's often sadly overlooked, which if a filmmaker is going to a distributor and they're saying, hey, I've got this movie, a lot of the time the first question will be, great, who's in it? And if you can't give them a name that they either have heard of, which is the best thing, or failing that they can look up within 2 minutes and they go, oh, that's an impressive CV for the actors, then chances are they go, yeah, I'm not really sure. It has to be. And I do understand that at that point people will go, well, if it's a good film and it's a good story, then it will be, then it will be seen and bought and heard, and cream always rises to the top. But unfortunately, there are so many filmmakers making their films and taking them to distributors that the distributors are kind of sport for choice in that regard. So they can just go, no, not for me. And and a lot of the time, if you have the film complete, and they'll say, and you say, can I show it to you? They'll say, show me the trailer. And that's that's the next thing you need to think about. What am I going to put in the trailer that will appeal to people, because that's what's going to sell it to people. And if it's a genre film such as Kill Ratio, if it's action, then that tells you what needs to be in the trailer. So you need to make sure it's full of those kind of things that you need.
Yeah. So let's dig into Kill Ratio. Maybe to start out, you can give us a quick pitch or a log line, just kind of tell us what the film's about.
Sure. So it's set in a fictional Eastern European country in modern day times, and there's a couple of there's a guy and a man and a woman from a telecoms company there negotiating contracts with the existing government to put in phone lines and that. And one of the people in the team is this chap James Henderson, and he's there as a fixer for the phone company, and he has a past that sort of hinted at, there's an idea that he could be like ex-CIA, but he helps out these companies, or possibly he could be there for other reasons, to do with his ex-CIA past. And whilst they're there, there's like an attempted military coup of the headed by this sort of despotic general in the country who is trying to overthrow the reigning president by using his position in the army and his henchman is like the head of the Secret Service there, and they attempt a coup, and it all kind of centers around this hotel where in the morning they'll do an address to the nation. And so in true kind of action and Die Hard in a fill in the location here tradition, James Henderson, played by Tom Hopper, is there in the place at the time and has to kind of take down the bad guys single-handed.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. So how did you get involved with this project? This is not a script that you wrote, but maybe you can just kind of tell us how this project kind of came across your desk.
Yeah, so I had sort of the year before, I'd shot a TV show in Canada called No Easy Days, which was like a kind of action. It's like half action and half politics. So it was kind of 24 meets House of Cards. It was about a terrorist invading the White House and taking the president's daughter hostage. And I shot that, and that was all sort of done and dusted. And then a while later, I heard from there was one of the producers who had sort of been vaguely associated with that, was doing something with some other people in Dublin, and had recommended me. They had this film coming up that they which was at the time it was called The Fixer, but then eventually became Kill Ratio, and they were looking for a director for, and he sort of recommended me to them. So they got in contact, and initially with an email and a phone call, and they sent over the script, and it was a fairly sort of simple and quick and easy process, really. I looked at the script and I enjoyed it, and I knew that we'd be able to sort of finesse it before we started shooting. And I was kind of excited about the idea of doing, an action movie all set literally in the same location. It seemed like a bit of a challenge, especially when, they told me that they already had access to a very large and recently not abandoned, because that makes it sound dilapidated, but recently no longer used hotel on the outskirts of Dublin that we would have the total run of. That kind of sounded appealing, because I've done things before in places where you're kind of battling we have this space in this area and we can, but we don't want to annoy the people here, so we kind of have to, tiptoe around. Whereas in this instance, we had the run of the place. So I thought, okay, in that case, we can have people running around doing we can do what we want. We can make as much damage as we like and as much noise as we like. So that there was an appeal there. And then when they said that they had Tom sort of interested and potentially involved to shoot it, I thought, I'm aware of his work on Black Sails, and I thought, oh, this is someone I'd really like to work with. So. It was kind of a no-brainer in that instance. So I said yes, and very soon, and it was a very fast turnaround from being offered the job to actually, jumping on a plane from London to Dublin and going over there, and a very sort of quick casting process in which we auditioned people in Dublin and got, in which we got a selection of actors whom you would, who generally I think wouldn't need to audition, and yet still came and auditioned for it and were absolutely fantastic and ended up, all giving great performances in the film.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like there's a lot of logistical things that really were, favorable for this and kind of got you involved. Are there, when scripts come across your desk, this is more of a general question, are there some common mistakes that you see screenwriters make? And again, this is sort of from the director's perspective. Are the things when you read scripts and you say, this is never going to work? And maybe you can just talk about those for a second.
So generally, when if screenwriters, how can I put this? Screenwriters do sometimes approach me, but to be honest, 9 times out of 10, I'm generally so busy doing my own stuff that I don't really read scripts that often from other people. Mainly because I don't have the time, and also because there's that thing of I don't want people like saying, well, he did this movie, he did this movie, and then a year ago I sent him a script and it had something very similar in it. So I kind of don't read a lot of things from people from script writers in that regard. But so in this instance, when I read Kill Ratio, it was because it had come from people via someone that I'd previously worked with. So there was kind of an in there for them. In terms of common mistakes, I think just it kind of goes back to the thing we talked about earlier of not having an eye on what's commercial. So people can have a great story or something, but before I'll even read something, I might ask kind of like, okay, tell me what who you picture being in this, or what you imagine the trailer looking like. And if you kind of can't if you can't answer even with an idea of that, then you probably haven't thought about how commercial it is at that point. If that makes sense,
Yeah, sure. Let's talk a minute about genre requirements. Obviously there's the action. Kill Ratio is an action movie, and sort of the standard thing you hear is, an action scene every 10 pages. But like, as an example, in the beginning of this, you have the scene in the hotel room, you have the half naked woman, you get a shot of her boobs. I'm just curious how those things kind of play into, do you get that stuff coming from the distributor? We want to see an attractive girl's boobs. Do you get that coming in? Listen, we need to beef up the action. Just genre requirements in general. I'd be curious to kind of get your take on those, because I think those would be important for screenwriters to hear.
Yeah. So when you're shooting this kind of movie, and there is at the end of the line between you've got the producers between you and them, but there is essentially the distributor slash studio sending notes and having and wanting certain things. There are things that they do want in a genre movie, and as you say, it's like the notes will come back going, well, we want a bit more action in this act or whatever, and there are notes along the lines of well, we'd like some boobs, and oh, and by the way, we want to see the hero with his shirt off, and that kind of thing. And so in those instances, you have to understand that what you're making here, firstly, what you're making here is something that someone else is paying for. So you kind of like, you are working for someone. So so they have they have the right to ask for whatever they want. And if you don't like it, you can very politely just say no to the job, and someone else can do it. But as if you're kind of like of the mindset of, right, well, I want to make this, then it's good to just work with them, and you can tweak things, and it's not like it's not that you're being told exactly what to do, because you can kind of come back and go, well, actually, I think we should do maybe this or this or this, and there's a certain dialogue, and they respect the fact that you've made films like this before, and you know what you're talking about, and you can end up reaching the best sort of possible solution. But yes, in these kind of movies, there will often be those kind of notes of, well, can we have a pair like boobs, or or the guy's abs, or that kind of thing. But in those instances, I mean, like for instance in this one, when they wanted instances of both male and female toplessness, my kind of I could understand it in terms of you want it for selling things, but I was actually able to argue for, in that case, can we do a bit more between these characters, with the characters who are doing these things. So actually, we ended up adding scenes in which there were like a sort of few more moving moments between the characters, when they were actually clothed, in order to bring a few more sort of dramatic moments into it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, in terms of like the action, I think you're right. There is that kind of thing of, if you've gone 10 pages and there's no action, then you need to put something in, which is why in these movies you have a very quick start, and in between 5 and 10 minutes you've usually gone into the first bit of action, which will usually be a smallish fight, so you can then start building to other things.
Mm-hmm.
And as ever with action movies, you're kind of like building towards, you're crescendoing towards the final act, where you're then climaxing, hopefully, with a sort of big cacophony of action in the movie.
Yeah, perfect. So how can people see Kill Ratio? Do you know what the release schedule is going to be?
So as far as I'm aware, I was told this the other day, it's out on the 9th, I believe, in the US, in selected theaters and online, so on various video on demand platforms. So it should be sort of fairly widely available. And then after that, I don't know about the UK. I would assume fairly shortly afterwards, but I don't know the specific dates. But the date I do know for the US is December 9th.
Perfect. And what's the best way for people to keep up with what you're doing? If you're on Twitter or Facebook, you can give us those handles, a blog, email address, whatever you're comfortable sharing. I'm sure people would just like to kind of get to know you better and see what you're up to.
Sure, yeah. So I'm on Twitter. It's just @PaulTanter. You can follow me on there for the random things that the random retweets and the occasional ranting about the fact that Donald Trump's been elected. I've got like a Facebook page, which is I think the header for it is Paul Tanter Films. That's like the page you should follow for me. And if you want to see the film, and then conversely, so unfortunately I don't have a universal name for all of these things. On Instagram, if you look for my company, which is Runaway Features, then that's where all the pictures relating to film tend to go. So if you're minded to follow me, feel free to follow me on those places.
Perfect. I will round all that stuff up and put it in the show notes so people can click over to it. Paul, fascinating interview. I really wish you luck with this film, and I really appreciate your coming on and talking with me today.
Thank you very much, Ashley. It's been a pleasure. Just
want to mention 2 things I'm doing at Selling Your Screenplay to help screenwriters find producers who are looking for material. First, I've created a monthly newsletter that will be sent directly to producers. Every member of SYS Select can submit 1 logline per newsletter. I went and emailed my large database of producers and asked them if they would like to receive this monthly newsletter of pitches. So far, I have well over 350 producers who have signed up to receive it. These are producers who are hungry for material and happy to read scripts from new writers. So if you want to participate in this pitch newsletter and get your script into the hands of lots of producers, sign up at sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. And secondly, I've partnered with one of the premier paid screenwriting leads services so I can syndicate their leads to SYS Select members. There are lots of great paid leads coming in each week from our partner. Recently, I've been getting 10 to 12 high quality paid leads per week. These are producers and production companies who are actively looking to buy material or are looking to hire a screenwriter for a specific project. If you sign up for SYS Select, you'll get these leads emailed directly to you several times per week. These leads run the gamut from production companies looking for a specific type of spec script to producers looking to hire a screenwriter to write up one of their ideas. Producers are looking for shorts, features, TV, and web series pilots, so it's a huge array of different types of projects that these producers are looking for, and these leads are exclusive to our partner and SYS Select members. To sign up, go to sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. Again, that's sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. Anyway, that's the show. Thank you for listening.